The 7 sages of ancient Greece were philosophers, statesmen, and lawgivers from the 7th and 6th centuries who became renowned for their wisdom. In Plato's Protagoras, he names 7 wise men who were, quote, lovers and emulators and disciples of the culture of the Spartans. Such were Thales of Miletus, and Pittacus of Mytilene, and Bias of Priene, and our own Solon, and Cleobulus the Lydian, and Myson the Kenian, and 7th in the catalogue of wise men was the Spartan Cleon. Unquote. Who exactly qualifies to be numbered among the 7 has been disputed. Some, for instance, include Anacharsis the Scythian and Periander of Corinth over Cleobulus and Myson. Others number Epidemnes of Gnosis and Pherecydes of Syros among them. 6 of the sages appear in Herodotus Histories: Thales, Solon, Bias, Pittacus, Periander, and Cylon. I intend to do videos on all of these individuals eventually, but I am going to start with the first of the sages that we encounter in Herodotus, Bias of Priene. In the first book of Herodotus Histories, we read that Croesus, king of Lydia, having conquered the Greek city-states in mainland Asia, sought to build ships and conquer the islands of Ionia. During this time, Bias, who came from the Ionian city of Priene, or, according to another account, Pittacus of Mytilene, came to Croesus and persuaded him not to take this course of action. He tells Croesus that the men of the islands are planning to march on Sardis and fight him on land. Croesus is delighted by this, saying, "May the gods put it into the minds of the dwellers of the islands to come with horses against the sons of the Lydians." But Bias responds, "Your Majesty, you seem quite eager to engage islanders on horseback, and reasonably so. But do you think that the islanders, ever since they have heard that you are planning to construct a fleet to sail against them, are any less eager to engage the Lydians on ships? If that happened, they might well avenge your enslavement of the mainland Greeks." Through this deceptive form of argument, Bias is telling Croesus that fighting the Ionians at sea, in their own domain, would be foolish, just as it would be for the Ionians to attack Croesus on the mainland. Croesus is pleased with this line of thinking, and decides to make peace with Ionia. This is typical of Herodotus' treatment of the sages, who generally play the role of advisors in his work. The only information on the life of Bias that we have can be found in Diogenes Laertius' book, Lives and Opinions of Eminent Philosophers. As this was written in the 2nd century AD, more than 800 years after the time that Bias lived, its reliability is questionable at best. With that said, Diogenes does seem to corroborate Herodotus' story, at least to some extent. He tells us that Bias met not with Croesus, but with Croesus' father, Eleades, and convinced him to make peace with Priene. He tells us that Bias was the son of Ptolemies. According to some, he came from a wealthy family, while others claim he was a laborer. Bias was known as a skilled advocate, as referenced by the poet Demodocus of Leros in his line, "If you happen to be prosecuting a suit, plead as I do at Priene." Herodotus mentions Bias again later in the first book, relating how the Ionians, having surrendered to Cyrus of Persia, gathered together at the Pan-Ionian sanctuary, which had been the meeting place of the Ionian League. Bias, who was in attendance, offered this counsel: that they should leave Ionia and sail to Sardinia, forming a new colony there, and so escape subjection under Persia and preserve their freedom. Bias was said to have composed a 2,000-line poem, which does not survive. In the Vatican's Hall of Philosophers there is a bust of Bias, with the inscription, "Most men are evil." Many sayings have been attributed to the sage, including, "Choose the course which you adopt with deliberation, but when you have adopted it, then persevere in it with firmness. Do not praise an undeserving man because of his riches. Gain your point by persuasion, not by force." On being forced to flee from his hometown, Bias is quoted by Cicero as saying, "All that is mine I carry with me." That is to say that his possessions are not material, but are his wisdom and his strength of character.